Peace be with you. I've been thinking a lot lately about James and John. They were two brothers that Jesus called early in his journey. And along the way, we often find them in conversations in the Gospels where they're arguing. They're getting on each other's nerves, and they're getting on the nerves of other disciples as well. In Mark chapter 10, there is the case where they're arguing about who is the greatest, and all of the disciples get frustrated with them. I bring this up because I think we realize that those that we're closest to, those disciples who we walk with every day, those who we live with, those who we are able to be in community with, whether in our homes or within very small groups and other places in our lives, the longer that we've spent with them and not been able to spend with others, it gets frustrating. It gets overwhelming. And sometimes it can even get annoying. I've been privileged to talk to a lot of you, and some of you have shared those frustrations. And I just wanted to take a moment and look at that from God's perspective in the midst of all this. One of the first things that I think we need to remember that a counselor in our congregation reminded me of today is that fear and anxiety are often seen in annoying tendencies, in being clingy or asking the same questions over and over again, or wanting to have answers that we don't know. And whether that's a spouse or a child or a parent, the more often we get asked those, the more annoyed that we get. But that's how a lot of people process fear. It's how a lot of people process grief. And certainly in the midst of all this, those are two valid feelings that we can have. Jesus, in addressing James and John in Mark 10, reminds them that they're not arguing who is the greatest, but rather they're reminded to be a servant of all and to care for others. And one of the things that we have to ponder right now is how within those relationships we are able to engage in, and those communities that we are able to be part of, no matter how small they are, how we often find ourselves looking to be servants of one another, of not trying to put our own priorities first or gain an advantage, but rather in these difficult times to look out for each other, to care for each other. And I think the most important part of all that is simply to listen and simply to hear what the other person is saying, not just the words of annoyance, but rather what is the deep concern behind those. But also the boldness to speak, to say, I love you, but I need a little time apart, to remind people that I've already told you, and I'll tell you again, that we're going to be okay as long as we do what we're doing, but we need to remember that as well. You see, what Jesus always reminds us of again and again is a promise of peace. And in this scary world we're living right now, we need that peace. And oftentimes we will find the longer that we are contained and quarantined together, the longer that we find ourselves unable to engage with all of community, that those little things that often wouldn't bug us get on our nerves. But when we look at ourselves as servants to one another, and we have open ears and open hearts, but also a boldness to speak the way the Spirit leads us, that we will be confident that God is in work in all of that, and that we will trust that just like James and John, we are loved and cared for. Peace be with you, friends. Amen.